And welcome to this webinar. My name is Tom Shakespeare, and for the next hour we're going to look at the impact of dementia inquirers, and we're going to be joined by Joe Webb from the University of Bristol and by Irene Donaldson, who is a pioneer, that is to say, a dementia inquiry participant. And I was very lucky. I'm going to whisper for a bit and then we're going to have a discussion. I was very lucky recently to go to the final meeting of Dementia Enquirers. And you can hear and see that I'm holding this pack. I hope you can see that. And it's full. It's a really good output of this Dementia Enquirers project. And it's full of the understandings that they have gathered through the last 5 years. And I'm just going to show you some of the things that are there. There is, for example, the gold standards for dementia research, which I hope you can see me holding up now. And it's all about how people can be involved in research. There's a whole lot of sheets about co-learning for research funders and for others. And these were presented to people from NIHR and ESRC. And Alzheimer's Society. And perhaps most importantly of all, there is this guide, sorry, I hope you can see that, to the research projects that, sorry, I'm trying to move to make it visible, the research projects that Dementia Enquirers has been involved in. And there are 25 of these between 2018 and 2023. And there's a page on each, and there's a bit, you can follow a code to understand them. And I'm just going to read out some of them. Therapeutic involvement in practical music making, how COVID and lockdown has made me feel, setting up a research peer support group, post-diagnosis dementia support, living with dementia with and without a care partner, contributing to the new 5 dementia strategy. And I think Irene, through Stand, has been involved in that. And you'll see in the chat, Philly, my colleague from Innovations in Dementia, is going to be making these packs available, and they're really good. I should also say, I hope you're happy for this to be recorded. Welcome, Irene. This webinar is going to be recorded. If you don't want to be included, don't make your screen live, as it were. Don't show your face. So, as I say, I'm Tom Shakespeare. I'm joined by Irene Donaldson. Great welcome to you. And by Joe Webb from the University of Bristol. And it was very interesting at the presentation of this pack the other day. One of the colleagues there from a research funder said that this was what they came into sociology research for. And that they had a great joy in the way that you could research your everyday surroundings and the way that Dementia Enquirers had done this. And I completely agree. My 5 years as a research advisor to the Dementia Inquiry Project has involved the best part of my week, the best part of my month. It's been such fun. So that's my first point, that involving people with dementia in your research will be good for your research. But I'm a disability studies researcher, and I think it's really important for anybody in disability research to include people with dementia. Dementia is a disability, it's an impairment rather, and there's lots of evidence for that. It affects thousands of people in this country. And of course, diagnosis is earlier and earlier. So you might get diagnosed with dementia, but have very few symptoms, and then gradually, obviously, symptoms develop. But you are written off by society as soon as you're diagnosed. So there's lots of people who society, in a way, is brush their hands off. Things like driving licenses taken away. People feel that people with dementia are not capable of participation, which is rubbish. A lot of the barriers, if you're taking a disability studies approach, a lot of the barriers to people with dementia are negative attitudes. So this feeling that people are not competent is central. If you've got any questions, I should have said, put them in the Q&A. down at the bottom of the screen, you'll find Q&A. So put them in the questions and we'll try and answer them. And as our colleague Sabrina said, you can get closed captions by clicking the CC button. Those will be provided. So how has it made a difference to what I do? I want to give you an example. My group and our colleagues in Glasgow were funded to do COVID-19 research. What has been the experience of disabled people during the COVID-19 pandemic? And we are funded by ESRC, which are the government funding of research. And in that project, we talked to people in Scotland and England twice. In that quality research project, it was very obvious to me that we should include people with dementia. And we were able to include one person in England and one person in Scotland. And I remember saying to my colleague Nick in Glasgow, I said, here's the person you should talk to. You're going to really enjoy this. And he came back to me afterwards. He said, that was a fantastic interview. She was brilliant. And I said, of course she was. I knew she would be. She's a wonderful researcher with dementia. So it is a very good thing. It is part of disability research. The Dementia Enquirers project is all about how people with dementia can do research. I do really think that we need to expand our notions of who is disabled and who is included. We already have ideas about emancipatory research, and this is research with disabled people that is committed to making a difference. We already have ideas of co-production with people affected by psychosocial disability and with people affected by intellectual disability. So it is nothing new to involve lots of groups of people in research. It adds value, and the idea of co-production is part of it. I want, if you don't mind, Joe, I'll go to Irene first. You've been involved. What was it like for you?
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry I'm a wee bit late, but I had a wee problem with Zoom. However,
no worries.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a wee bit anxious today because the Dementia Enquirers programme has meant so much to me. It has made such a big impact and positive impact on my life. I'm just hoping I can do it justice today.
You've got plenty of time.
So for me personally, when I was diagnosed, Tom, I had experienced exactly as you described it. I was binned off entirely by society. But I'm a wee bit of a terrier, and I wanted still to be part of what was all happening out there. And so I threw myself into research. If I was invited to be part of a research programme, I did, because I wanted to make a difference. I still felt I had stuff to offer and to give. However, I very quickly realised that that was not what I was achieving. I very quickly realised that in very many instances, I was just ticking somebody's box. You know, I was just the wee token person with living with dementia that was invited along for a very short spell. And that was it. Do you know, very often what I said was never included. And very often I never knew what happened after my little part of the involvement because there was no follow-up. And that's really hard to accept, and it's hard to hear. And so I withdrew completely from research. It was a hard no every time I was invited to be part of anything. I was persuaded by a person I really trusted, a really good friend, to take part then in some co-production work, which was wonderful, which was marvellous. I loved it. I felt included and I felt an equal partnership and all of that. And it really restored my faith in being part of research and that it might be able to make a difference for people living with dementia and in all other aspects where the research was being carried out. But there was still something missing. And that was because we were doing somebody else's project, we were working on somebody else's ideas. And so the Dementia Enquirers programme was the missing piece, because that was our ideas. It was what we felt we wanted to find out a bit more about. It was what we felt was important to us. And so I was really lucky to be to experience the Dementia Enquirers from two perspectives, from a group who benefited from a grant from the Dementia Enquirers so we could carry out our own piece of research. And I was lucky enough to be invited to be a pioneer. So I was working and supporting and helping groups who were all on the same journey as my group was. And it was just, honestly, Tom, I can't put into words how it breathed life back into me. It had been squashed. My life had been squashed into this tiny wee dark space. And along with peer support, when I discovered peer support and being invited into the Dementia Enquirers programme, I became me, and the best version of me I could. I became stronger, more confident, became happier. It was marvellous. It's a wonderful piece of work that cascades into all of my life. It's not just on the meetings, it cascades into all of my life, and so all the people in my life as well.
And so, I mean, what I'm getting at is it's empowering. It sounds really empowering to you.
Yeah. I mean, I had retired so many skills. I had been actively encouraged. You don't need to use that skill anymore. You don't need to do that. You just need to focus on all the, and the Dementia Enquirers gave my brain a proper workout, a proper challenge. It was always challenging. It was often exhausting. But do you know what? It was so fulfilling. And I think the real gold star of the Dementia Enquirers was you were never made to feel alone. And even when things didn't go quite to plan, or you came upon something that you were finding hard, there was always support there and encouragement there, as and when you needed it. But people living with dementia, people like me, we were pushing it forward. It was our ideas, our plans, and we used all of these skills that we'd forgotten we even had.
Well, that is the great thing that I found about working with Dementia Enquirers, is that obviously you all have skills, you all have done things in your previous work, and those can be really useful. I want to turn to Joe Webb, if that's all right, and ask him, so what difference does it make? What is the difference, the added value of having people with dementia in your research projects, and what difference does it make in your experience to people taking part?
Thanks, Tom. The short answer is it makes a huge amount of difference, but I will I will expand on that. I'm going to ramble slightly, but I'm going to give some examples from a specific research project. So first of all, I should say that the work that I'm talking about is not just my work, it's the work of the Forget Me Not research group, which includes Sandy Reed, Roy James and Harry Davis. And I particularly just want to highlight at this juncture that Roy James very sadly passed away recently, but Roy was such a huge part of this group and made a massive difference in all of the research and other projects that he did. So I just want to briefly say thanks, Roy, and we miss him very much. But on his behalf, I'm going to talk about some of the research that we did. So one project that springs to mind when I think about added value was a project that the Forget Me Not research group, Sandy, Harry and Roy particularly, came up with, which they were really interested in what happens to people post-diagnosis. Now, the first part of the added value from this was that they knew from their own experience that the first 2 years post-diagnosis could be make or break. All of them had experienced degrees of kind of low mood, depression, feeling like their confidence had been knocked, and they wanted to find out what makes a difference, what kind of positive support people get, and what kind of support would they like to see that they don't get. Now, through our discussions in the group early on, it became really clear that they didn't want to put people on the spot, because they knew what it was like in various different domains, whether that's at the doctors or seeing a social worker or whoever that might be, to be on the receiving end of questions that suddenly put you in the spotlight and you don't quite know how to answer, at least in that moment. And they really didn't want the participants for this project to feel like that. So even in those kind of embryonic stages, they were thinking about how can we design a project that supports people, that is a safe space and that they feel comfortable to talk and not put on the spot. So even at that early stage, their involvement, or their leading the project actually, was completely intrinsic to how it turned out. So the way that they decided to do it was through photography and a method called photo voice. So they wanted to find out people's post-diagnosis experiences by having people, participants, take photos of their everyday lives. Now, this sounds quite pedestrian in some ways, but actually there was a lot of thinking behind this, and that the way they actually shaped it was fundamental for the people who took part. So the first thing was that Harry knew from his own experience that taking up photography after his diagnosis was a huge confidence boost and a huge help to him for a lot of reasons. The first was that it's, by its very nature, it's an activity which grounds you in the moment, and you are completely present and just thinking about what's going on through the lens, which can help abate some worries that he had at the time. The second thing was that he found it was an activity that got him out of doors, and he wanted to make sure, and the rest of the group did, that people who were involved in this, they knew that they might be at stages in their life where they hadn't quite got over the shock of diagnosis, and they might not be going out as much as they used to. Things like enforced, as you said, Tom, having driving licenses taken away or work ending. So they wanted to come up with a data collection method, which was in itself a kind of intervention, which gave people a chance to learn something new, because he found that was a huge confidence boost to him when he realized, actually, I can do things, even though my confidence has taken a knock. I've learned photography, and actually some of the photos I've taken are pretty good. And he wanted other people to have that experience too. The second part, as I said, was providing people with an activity which kind of necessitated them getting out of doors to some extent. The third thing, as I mentioned earlier, is they didn't want people to be on the spot. So we talked about what that would look like, and they wanted the photos projected that people had taken at the front of the room. And we talked about why that might be. And they wanted it in a focus group, in a group of people, but they didn't want all eyes to be on the person talking. So by having the photos projected, they reasoned that, if there were any dips in conversation, people could still be looking at the photos, so it wasn't, all the attention wasn't focused on the person talking. Secondly, they acted as memory prompts for the people who took part. So if they lost their train of thought at any point, there was a huge photo. But also the participants decided what they wanted to talk about. They decided what photos to choose, what photos they wanted to actually share with the group. So they had a chance. It wasn't all on the researchers' agenda, on our agenda. They had a chance to decide what they wanted to talk about. So the group, Sandy, Harry and Roy particularly, put so much thought into how to make this a safe, comfortable space where people could share their experiences of post-diagnosis support. The last thing I wanted to say about that is that a lot of photo voice projects give kind of disposable cameras to participants, because they just want people to take photos of whatever the research aim or the research kind of agenda is. But the group didn't want to do that. In fact, they said, whatever our budget is, the majority of it's probably going to go on getting good cameras, because we want the participants to know that we're serious about them learning a new skill. This is something which they can play with, try. They also wanted to, for example, partner with the Royal Photography Society, so that the people who took part not just felt, but could see that we were taking their potential and their artistic ability seriously. For example, the project was featured in the Royal Photography Society magazine. But I think the key point here was that for them, it wasn't just about collecting data. It wasn't just about finding out the answer to a research project. It was about, they came at it from that perspective, but also about from the point of view that they wanted to offer people something that had made a difference to them. The other part of that, of course, was that peer support for them was fundamental in kind of traversing those difficult first year or two. And they knew that often, before people, if they don't engage in peer support, they can become particularly isolated. So they also wanted to create a situation whereby People could share what was happening to them in the safe space and get to know other people who were going through the same thing. So they were coming at it from the point of view almost as an intervention, looking at the things that had worked for them and seeking to help people who were going through something that they themselves had gone through. Now, what difference did that make? In terms of the data we got, the photos were absolutely stunning, beautiful, and were really visceral examples of their everyday life. But it was amazing to see people, the participants, take that in all sorts of different directions and interpret that any way they wanted. And Sandy, Harry, and Roy were really keen that they had the participants had the space to do that. The last thing I just wanted to say on that is that Sandy, Harry, and Roy also co-facilitated the focus group. They were very clear that they wanted me to kind of keep time and make sure things stayed on track. But that was my role, moving between people. But what they did is something that we absolutely couldn't do. I should say it was me and Jemima Dooley who were the academic researchers on this. And what they could do in the focus group was make people feel at ease, talk about their own experiences, which of course I don't have, share their own experiences as a way of getting other people and prompting other people to talk more. And actually, we've just written a paper on this where we've looked at their specific involvement in the focus group and actually what they did, which enabled people to talk more, give more detailed answers, and just be comfortable to talk. And we actually interviewed the participants after the project, a couple of months afterwards, to ask them about their experiences of taking part. And unanimously, they all said that because it was led by people living with dementia, it meant a number of things to them. One, they felt more comfortable to open up. Two, they appreciated the thought that had gone into their involvement, how the research was shaped to fit them and not just on the researcher's agenda, but also how inspiring it was for them to see at a point when they were coming to terms with a new diagnosis, how inspiring it was to see people living with dementia leading a research project, doing things which the participants felt might have been, might be something that they wouldn't get to do. But actually seeing other people doing it made them realize that they could do other things. So a number of our participants took up photography after that. Yeah. And the ones who didn't talked about how it had given them more confidence to do new things like join dance classes or, or engage in other activities which they weren't doing at that moment. So by seeing other people living with dementia leading by example, it also really inspired them to do other things beyond the research project. So the value began as the project began, but really it followed through to the impact it made on participants right the way through to the end and after.
Thank you very much, Joe. And I just want to highlight some of the key messages. I'm going to go to Irene in a minute, if I may. But one of the key messages is people with dementia can lead their own research projects, drawing on previous life skills and learning new ones to explore the questions that most interest them. And I think Joe's nodding because that's exactly what they're doing. The other idea that I think is really useful is this driving seat idea. People with dementia in the driving seat, which goes beyond typical co-production. I'm reading key message 3, because people with dementia are there right at the start, choosing the topic, the research question, and the methods. And they're more free to do things differently, to venture beyond their usual paradigms. And finally, number 5, driving seat research is vital if we are to understand what living well means. The research questions that people with dementia generate are often different. They're based on lived experience, on topics that will make a real impact on people's lives. And I want to go to Irene, if I may, because obviously you talked about how inspiring it was to be a researcher. What's been really lovely, I remember our friend Dory, and she was a gardener. That was her profession. She went and did gardens. And she said to me, and almost in wonder, I'm now a researcher. I can go and do research. And of course you can. It's really lovely and brilliant to see you doing social research. I wonder, Irene, have you experienced this for yourself, or have you seen it with other people, how putting people with dementia in the driving seat makes a difference?
Yeah, I mean, it made a world of difference to me, Tom. I mean, as I explained, I'd been involved in research before and became very jaded by it all. And so being in the driving seat, it just makes it relevant. As I think Joe said, you know, it's about living in our world. It's about what's important to us. It's our topics. It's our pressing matters that we're choosing to focus on and to research. And that makes all the difference. That ownership, that investment makes a project work, because you want to drive it forward. You want to get outcomes that are going to make a difference, and you can only do that if you have a successful piece of work. And I have watched people, you know, who were like me and didn't want to be involved in research, but they have actually said, oh, if you guys are part of this, and it's, you know, you've listened to us in this group, and you guys are going to be leading this, we're happy to be part of this piece of work. So I think that the audience, or you know your target audience of participation, grows quite immensely if you have people living with dementia, because there's a sense of trust and a sense of partnership that perhaps doesn't always, or isn't always felt to be there if people are living with dementia. So I have felt the magnificent difference of it, and I've certainly watched and listened to and seen the feedback of others who have felt the same.
I think that's really interesting, Irene, because I mean, it's exactly what you're saying is that more people with dementia take part because they have confidence that this is being done by people like them, and therefore it's theirs, and that driving seat idea. I think it's also the case, isn't it, that a lot of the questions, you know, people would never have thought of. You know, there's a question here that's been researched by the Up and Go project from Leeds. Well, I'll read you the title. Can a dementia diagnosis open doors to new opportunities? I mean, in a way that says it all, but I bet you anything you like, that's never been researched before. No,
and being a pioneer, I was really privileged to see the different topics that people were choosing, because and sometimes you're like, gosh, you know, we've talked about that, but who thought that would be something that you could do a piece of research on? So yeah, it's just so relevant, so grassroots and relevant that people grow with the programme when they're involved.
Absolutely. So more participation, better questions, I think, and also, you know, people with dementia obviously collecting this data, whether through photo voice, as Joe has said, or through interviewing people, or using Zoom. What was really interesting was that the Dementia Enquirers and the deep groups had been using Zoom. And then when we had the COVID lockdown, people with dementia were saying, look, use our, we've been doing it for ages. So let's do this for our research. And it really helped gathering data, being able to use Zoom. It was really helpful to me. And I remember interviewing somebody, in fact, a really great photographer. And I turned over a calendar to March today, and I saw a March Hare, which was one of her photographs taken with great skill and reproduced on his calendar. And she said to me, I said, well, you can use a telephone, can't you? And she said, no, I can't use a telephone. And Zoom, because you just hit the red button, she said, was much easier for her. So I don't know what you feel, Irene, but it's really, I mean, if you can get through the address, it's a really accessible way of involving people. And of course, you can record it and transcribe it. I just want to say, I see 2 questions in the Q&A. That's really good. Please add more questions. That's where you put them. Steve and Hannah have added theirs. Please add yours, and we'll come back to those. Joe, I'll go to you now, if I may. In terms of methodology, how do you think, you've talked about photo voice. Are there other ways in which people with dementia have, as it were, changed the way you, as a researcher, go about research?
Yeah, absolutely. Because fundamentally, they're thinking about the experience of the participants in a way that I don't have that expertise. They're thinking through what would it be like to be on the receiving end of this. And often that means changing the way you do things. So this is this might sound like a bit of a flippant example, but talking about, doing online interviews, using Zoom and things like that. We did a research project recently for being funded by Deep, and the researchers living with dementia were really concerned about how easy it would be to create an informal atmosphere within something like Zoom. And they were, they really thought that through about how do we get people to feel comfortable and talk when they, these were all people that hadn't met each other before. So they talked about how from the start, they were going to share some of their experiences and get things going by, drawing on their own expertise and their own experiences. But they also talked about how we were going to use a reasonable chunk of our budget to find out what biscuits people liked before Zoom, and to send every single participant a pack of their favorite biscuits, so that we could have a break, in the recording, a break in the data collection, where we all, where we built this time in to to have a cup of tea and our favorite biscuit and just talk not about research, because they wanted to kind of create those informal spaces within something which could be could be a bit more of a tricky space to interact in. So they were they're constantly thinking those things through, and again, just informally talking to participants afterwards what they liked. People often joked, oh well, it was the free biscuits, but that really it's those little it's those little touches which actually really make a difference to people, and they're putting themselves in the participants' shoes. And also, as Irene said, they're starting from the premise that they are asking questions based on their own expertise and their own experience that they want the answers to, and they know that those things are going to be meaningful to other people, so they can draw on those their own experiences to do research that has a much greater chance of making an impact or a difference in people's lives, because it's the questions, the impetus comes from people who are experiencing whatever the issue is.
Absolutely. And I hope this will come through, but I've got a postcard which I find really useful. And I'm not a person with dementia, but I find this useful in conversations. And I want to go to Irene and say, where's this from? What's this postcard? Why is it important?
Well, I've got mine sat here ready and waiting as well. Yeah, well, it's really important because whether you're on a Zoom call or actually you're in a room sitting around half a dozen people, we all think and operate at different speeds and at different levels. And personally, for me, my mouth can sometimes take longer to catch up with my brain. So I might want to say something, but it just takes me a little bit of time to get there. So if I can put my card up, that gives me time to, to let people know I want to say something, I'm working on it, and, by the time you get around to asking me. But also, I mean, everybody knows that in meetings, there are people who talk and there are people who have great ideas, but who may sit back and don't want to interrupt, don't want to, put their hand up or whatever. And this is just such a helpful tool. It just says, I don't want to interrupt anybody's flow, you're in the middle of something, but before I lose my thought, because if I don't say what I'm going to say and let you know I want to say it, it might be gone. So I'm just letting you know that there's something I'm going to want to say, and it's magnificent because people who manage meetings or who manage discussion groups or focus groups and stuff, they're very good at noticing when you have your card up and at bringing you in a timely manner. And it doesn't always work, because sometimes you have, by the time you're invited, have forgotten what it was you were going to say. But it doesn't matter, because somebody wanted to include you when you had wanted to be included. So it's a wonderful wee tool. It helps everybody with social manners because we all sometimes need a bit of help with that. But it gives everybody an opportunity, whether you're a talker or more a listener, whether you can push your point or you need a little bit of help to be drawn in. It's wonderful.
Brilliant.
And it's for Zoom and in the room.
Yeah, don't forget your yellow card. It'll be of value to everybody. So I'm just going to go to the Q&A, and we've got a really nice comment from Steve Kennedy. Dementia Northern Ireland arranged for its members to take up a course in photography. Only myself and one other member attended. We found it absolutely amazing. Our own eyes were seeing a whole new world, which we'd not even realized was there. From a lone apple core lying on an empty car park to watching the majestic landing and takeoff of the beautiful swans on Loch Earn. So thank you, Steve. I'm really glad that was positive for you. And Hannah Zelig, who I've worked with, and we're doing an evaluation of this whole Dementia Voices program at the moment. And she says, it's great to hear that new opportunities that dementia might bring can be a research topic. It was certainly the case in our Welcome research that we found that new creative experiences are possible for people with dementia. And these might be singing or visual art and all the rest of it. And there's a wonderful Dementia Voices group called a Craftivist, I think. Have you been part of that, Irene, where people with dementia share skills, drawing, carving, printmaking, whatever, with each other, often through Zoom? And it's really, I think it's been fantastic as far as I can see. I want part of it, but unfortunately not. And then finally, this comment from Amy Redhead, and this is something which, no, there's lots of comments, great. So Amy is saying, I work predominantly with people with learning difficulties in my research, and I have to jump through a lot of hoops for ethical approval in terms of informed consent. Is this also an issue you have to contend with in your dementia research? So I'm going to ask Joe and Irene, if you like. Often ethics committees are very protective of people with dementia for good reasons, and they don't want sometimes people to do research with people with dementia. What do you think? What's your view? Let's go to Irene first. Did you run into this ethics question?
Yeah, very often, and it's absolutely right, because ethics is important, and everybody needs protection, whether you have dementia or any other disability that you're living with, or just anybody. So yeah, we do come across it, but my experience has been that the whole ethics issue can be overly complicated and overly complex and not easily accessed, and therefore becomes a barrier when it probably need not be a barrier. It's right, it's there, but it need not be a barrier. And I know that you mentioned earlier, Tom, the Dementia Enquirers Gold Standards for Ethical Research. Nothing is shied away from in this document. Every single thing that makes a research needs to consider to have an ethically sound research project is covered in this. But the difference is it's made simple and it's made accessible. And so the fear isn't there, or it need not be there, because it really is very accessible. It covers all the bases. There's no subject taboo, but it's accessible. And if I can say that, you know, currently I'm on a research project around a topic I'm really passionate about. It's a self-management course called the Good Life course with dementia, the Good Life with Dementia course. And we're doing a bit of research around that. And, you know, people living with dementia have been encouraged and invited to be part of the panel that goes before the ethics committee, if we so choose to do that. It's not my bag. I've sat before many committees in my life. I don't really want to do that now, but good on those who are choosing to do it. So yes, it can be a barrier, but it's an unnecessarily complicated barrier. I think it's necessary, but they make it too complicated.
Thanks, Irene. And just to clarify, she's Irene's absolutely right. I don't know if you can see this, but working in real partnership, information that's simple, accessible, and open, confidentiality and anonymity, informed consent capacity, respect and acknowledgement, respect and safety and well-being. I mean, it's all here, and it's just made, as Irene said, made simple. Joe, did you find that wanting to work with people with dementia was seen as an obstacle by your ethics committee, or how did you cover this?
I think it has been in certain projects. I think it's so dependent on the whims of the reviewers that you get. Actually, sometimes people are incredibly supportive and get it. Other times, there is, I think, sometimes a kind of a stereotype and a worry and a kind of risk aversion that, that people with dementia, as Irene said, these things are in place for good reasons, but I think sometimes there is a kind of risk aversion to involving people living with dementia in research. But I think one of the point I wanted to make is that by including, or rather working with and having people living with dementia in the driving seat of research, it actually forestalls a lot of potential ethical issues, because they are thinking through from the participant's point of view at every stage of the way. How is this going to be? How is this going to affect people? If I was in their position with my expertise and experience, how would I be feeling about this? So actually, they're driving the research has a much greater potential for good ethical research that keeps the participants' competencies and potential feelings at the core, as a core of, core concern of the research project. But I also think, just slightly going off piece here, I also think that having people living with dementia driving research also brings to the surface some kind of hidden assumptions as well, whether that's from ethical panels about what people are and aren't able to do, whether it's from the way, as Irene said, ethics processes and systems are set up, which are needlessly complicated and often presuppose a kind of particular kind of familiarity with certain systems or particular kinds of ethical jargon, but actually at their core are just about thinking through how this affects people, what's going to, what the impact is going to be on participants. So it kind of helps bring those to the surface, but also in a lot of the research we've done together, it also brings to the surface the kinds of expertise we value or don't value. So an example of that, or the kinds of people who can be researchers, or rather how people assume certain people can or can't be researchers. An example of that is we got funding for a project whereby the researchers living with dementia were paid for their participation, as they should be. But in order to do that, they had to be temporary staff members of the University of Bristol. And to go through that process of getting onto being a temporary staff member was unbelievably complicated. First point. The second point is they needed passports and birth certificates, which people didn't have, but those processes kind of by omission presuppose that a lot of the temporary staff would be young, would have passports and birth certificates readily to hand, would be able to do all these online forms. And actually we had to escalate it to kind of various different people in HR to say, look, they don't have those things. They are who they say they are. Can we just get on and do the research? And it's, I think often by including and working with people living with dementia, it can bring to the surface a lot of those things which there are embedded and hidden assumptions, whether that's ethics panels, journal reviewers. I recently had a review that I'm working through at the moment, where they one of the reviewers was quite skeptical of whether people living with dementia could have been involved in shaping the research as much as they did, or in the writing or in the analysis. So they wanted kind of extra proof of that, because they kind of assumed that they wouldn't have the competencies to do that.
So we need to educate ethics committee members about what people with dementia can do. Thank you very much, Joe. I'm just going to go to some questions, some more questions. So Liz says, what do you think, and I'm going to ask a couple of them if that's okay. I'll remind you what they are. Firstly, what do you think what will it take for people, sorry, where is it? It's been answered. I think it's disappeared. No, here it is. What do you think it would take for research led by people with dementia to influence the way support and services are planned and delivered and the way resources are used? So that's really interesting. What would it take to make a difference to how it's done? And then what are the recommendations for funders research to support more research by and co-produced with people with dementia? So how can we make a difference? That's the bottom line. What do you think, Irene? How can we fund more research and how can it make a difference?
Well, what I think the Dementia Enquirers programme has done, Tom, is it has documented really well the impact that the projects where people living with dementia have. It's evidence-based. There's lots of evidence there. People living with dementia are well documented in their experiences and the impacts it's made on their lives. The academics who have been brave and willing and generous and have embraced the approach, they're well documented too. So I think that the evidence is there. I mean, I'm not really in a position to know how that can be continued to be promoted and taken forward, but it is there. People can't say that they distrust the approach or they're not sure what impact it will have, because there is evidence to say that it does make a difference. And I'm confident that that has to be taken on board. People do have to listen to that. Funders do have to listen to that. And in fact, some of the research that I have been involved in, the researchers themselves have said that that is a really one of the key points that they present as part of their bids for funding, and they use it as a promotion rather than a wee side note or, oh, and by the way, we might have to do this. They're saying this is something that we think is a real positive in our research because it will make a difference. So I think it's about people having the confidence to look at the evidence, look at what's been done, and to build on it. It'd be awful if it's not built on. It needs to continue.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of funders will be demanding adherence to these standards. We'll be saying, if you're going to research with people with dementia, you need to follow what Dementia Enquirers have worked out is the best way forward. And I think that's very, very exciting. So, there's another question. Yeah, it's a Jane Wilbur. Irene, this is not a question, it's a comment. Irene, thank you for your powerful talk and for articulating how frustrating and disempowering tokenistic participation is. It's great to hear how much you've gained from your involvement in the study. So that's for Jane, for Irene. Now, Hannah, as I say, is coming in with a second question. Have you any thoughts about working well with people who are living with more advanced dementia? So Irene, I mean, in your group or in your research, were there a range of people with dementia more advanced and less advanced?
Yeah. There is a range, and that changes as the programme progresses. The advantage that we have and the advantage that the Dementia Enquirers, because you're working with groups of people that you're already fairly familiar with, is that there is a safety barrier for most people in there, that you already know them and they already know you. And so that, that element of getting to know somebody and understanding where they're coming from. And we learned very quickly, quite a few members of my group, and it's something that's now troubling me, is my speech is beginning to be less fluent. And we noticed that many people in our group, as their dementia is progressing, is their communication skills. And so we've just learned to adapt. And throughout our project, we learned to adapt how we gathered the information. And so, sometimes if you wanted to, you could talk. It could be done through pictures. There were games that were played. We did it with pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that, you could put together. It could just be an emotion bubble and things like that. So we learned very quickly that people living with dementia in a more advanced state still do have much to offer. How you tap into that much to offer is really the big thing to do, and it's about being flexible. The Dementia Enquirers project was so good in that they always allowed you to be flexible. You know, if things didn't quite work out the way that you had wanted it to or whatever, you could change it. And I think it is about being flexible. My mum had vascular dementia, and she died from that, and she was entirely non-communicative before she died, but she was still able to tell us by pointing, by, you know, moving things around on a table. She was still able to share what she was. If you had the patience and the time and the willingness, she could still tell you what you want to do. So it's about being flexible, about being adaptable and being available. But I think familiarity helps a lot.
Absolutely. I think, and the fact that everybody in Dementia Enquirers is familiar with each other, and with Philly Hare, who's been typing in the chat box, we did a whole a theory of change process. Now, theory of change is a complicated process. It's not easy for anybody. And people with dementia from Dementia Enquirers did a whole theory of change process really effectively, and really stunned the people who are not used to working with people with dementia as to what their capabilities were. You mentioned games. I just want to take the opportunity to tell people about the Scottish Dementia alumni who've made a resource called Dementia Through Our Eyes. And this was an interactive game for children aged between 8 and 10 to educate them about dementia. And you can follow the link to the game from the Dementia Voices website. And it's really exciting. And I just want to read this for you. They noticed that the children changed their behavior during the course of the game as they learnt about dementia. First, they ran quickly to the answer, not taking much time to think, but as the game progressed, they took much more time to reread the possible answers and discuss between them what answer was best. I love this. I think it's really, really, it's really exciting. This cross age group work that that group in Scotland have done. So Chris Grundy says, totally agree that asking the stakeholders what they're interested in produces amazing questions we researchers would never think of. We found exactly the same with research I was part of on transport and health in deprived communities. It's something we should do across research. So that's a message to all the researchers here. Then from Yami Yip, there is a question about what do you think are some risk factors that might influence increased mental and physical healthcare use in people with dementia after diagnosis of dementia? What support tools? Well, that's a complicated question, Yami, and I'm pretty sure that it's in the literature somewhere, but maybe Irene's got a view on that. Why would people maybe use more healthcare? What support tools could be useful? Maybe we'll focus on that. What support tools might be useful to people at the time of diagnosis, do you think? Have you any ideas, Irene?
Well, personally, the support tool that has been of the biggest support to me has been peer support. And I had none. I had none for 3 years after diagnosis. And I was in that very deep, dark place. And peer support was the thing that made all the difference to me. And I know that within the peer support group that I am in, the people who support each other make the best job of their lives. They're having the best quality time because we all support each other. The network that has been drawn up, the option to talk about anything without judgment, without prejudice, it's magnificent. Mental health and dementia go so closely together. Depression and anxiety, and peer support, in my personal experience, has been the biggest antidote to that. It has been the thing that has made the difference. And you know, we see it. You know, we've lost members of our group to dementia, naturally after 2 or 3 years. But the one thing they have clung to, the thing they have come to as long as they have been physically able, has been the peer support group. You know, they're no fussy for the appointments with their specialists, and they're no fussy for X, Y, and Z, but that peer support is key to them, because through that they can access so many other tools that can strengthen their journey and make their journey much more bearable.
If I could just add to that, we recently completed some research funded by DEEP as part of the Dementia Enquirers projects, and it was on post-diagnosis support for people living with dementia. We interviewed in focus groups people from across the UK about what support they got, because the researchers living with dementia really wanted to know about what was working, what wasn't working, the discrepancies between what kinds of support was offered and what wasn't. And because people we know that people are innovating in some areas, but that learning doesn't necessarily get passed on. And as Irene said, across the board, where people access peer support, they found it uniformly the most useful, the most powerful part of their support in terms of, for so many reasons, in terms of their mental health, but also in terms of, that was often where they were getting advice about benefits, what they were eligible for, what they could apply for, or and how to do it. People also said that there's sometimes not enough information when you get diagnosed. Sometimes there's an overwhelming amount.
Yeah.
But actually knowing peer support is a great tool from the participants' point of view of getting the answer you need when you need it. So you don't know when you're going to come across that, but actually through peer support, you can kind of have that targeted intervention, targeted input at the point that you need it. But peer support was providing a whole host of different benefits and ways of improving people's life. Beyond just having friends to talk, it was also about, as I said, benefits. People were giving expertise by experience on medical symptoms. They were, a whole host of things that people found to be so useful and so powerful. Yeah, as people said in our research, it made a huge difference to mental health as well.
Thank you very much, Joe. I've just put in the chat the website where you can find out so much more and read all these wonderful documents that we've told you about. And it's www.dementiaenquirers, that's one word, .org.uk, www.dementiaenquirers.org.uk. And you can find all of these documents there. And I really would, they'd be very useful for researchers, really useful for students, and really useful for people with dementia. So there's material there for everybody, including research funders, into how you can make your programs accessible and how you can get people involved. And I think that's really, really important. We've just got a couple of minutes, and we're going to have a debrief after this, Joe and Irene, so stay on. But for now, I'd really like to thank you, Joe, for your projects and for your advice and your wisdom. Irene, for your projects, your advice, your wisdom. It's been so helpful. And I'd like to thank Sabrina for making it possible. She's our wonderful administrator in International Centre for Evidence and Disability, and Philly Hare, who's been messaging away. And her latest message, you can follow us on Twitter, #dementia and #Dementia Enquirers. So do have a look at that conversation. There's lots of people with dementia on Twitter, if you like that sort of thing, and have a look at what they're talking about. It's really interesting. But for now, thank you very much for taking part. You can ask further questions. Thank you for all of those questions in the Q&A. Please keep in touch, and please think about how your project can involve people with dementia. It might not be about dementia, but people with dementia experience everything that you experience. So let's make sure they're asked what their opinions are in terms of whatever you're researching. So thank you very, very much, Irene. Thank you, Joe. thank you for all the people that took part, for 50 or so folk that joined us. And I hope you have a brilliant rest of the day. Thank you.